Hello and welcome to Wisdom Tree's Fireside Chat. We're talking about efficient core, and with me I have Wisdom Tree's Pierre Debreu and Elvira Kurmshena. Pierre, Elvira, you've developed a new and perhaps more efficient take on the traditional 60-40 portfolio, something Wisdom Tree calls the efficient core. Does that mean that the traditional 60-40 approach is dead? And how does efficient core take its place?
So whether savings for retirement or a future home, investors are typically looking for strong return without taking on too much risk, right? And traditionally, they have combined equity and bonds into a portfolio, typically a 60-40 portfolio, 60% in equity, 40% in bond, right? And by doing so, the risk return profile is enhanced, but it also creates a limit on the growth prospects of the portfolio because the overall risk taken is less, right? And so you have this tension between the risk efficiency and the long-term growth prospect of the portfolio that has been called the portfolio paradox, right? And 60-40 is one of the solutions if you want, but also the way the financial world has tried to solve this portfolio paradox is by saying to young investors, you have a long time to invest, so you probably should lean toward more equities, maybe an 80-20 or 90-10, and for older investors to lean towards bonds, right, and go more to 60 bond, 40 equity, or 70 bond, 30 equity. Now, this is not optimal, and what's interesting is that, in fact, in the academic research, there are more optimal solutions to that portfolio paradox.
Exactly. So at Wisdom Tree, we wanted to develop a strategy that would reap the diversification benefits offered by a mix of bond and equity portfolio, but without compromising the return potential. And the answer lies in a simple and elegant solution. So the key is leverage. By leveraging a well-diversified portfolio, investors can both maintain the diversification benefits offered by equities and bonds while enhancing returns at the same time. So at Wisdom Tree, we developed a levered 60-40 portfolio that challenges the conventional wisdom of a traditional 60-40 portfolio and opens the door to a more efficient portfolio construction.
So what I'm hearing is that leverage is what makes the ETFs efficient. But of course, some investors might find the idea of leverage quite scary. What do you tell them?
Mubin, that's a great question. Efficient core is grounded in strong theoretical foundations of optimal portfolio allocation dating back to 1950s and 60s. In his seminal paper, published in 1952, Markowitz introduced modern portfolio theory that laid the groundwork for these concepts. So within the Markowitz framework, if investors would like to achieve higher return than the market, they have to accept higher risk. And Sharpe, among others, demonstrated that by borrowing at a risk-free rate and investing back into the market allows to achieve higher return for the same level of risk than otherwise offered by a portfolio that is simply allocating to riskier assets. Obviously, theoretical models do have certain assumptions and limitations. So recognizing these limitations, like, for example, that in practice it's quite challenging to precisely define the market portfolio and some borrowing constraints also exist, we can here look at empirical data. And in fact, AQR's Cliff Asness did publish such a paper called Why Not 100% Equities back in the 90s. And there he demonstrated that a levered equity and bond portfolio historically outperformed an all equity portfolio with matching volatility. So again, this demonstrates us that leverage, when applied prudently within the portfolio, can also enhance returns without compromising diversification.
Yeah, and more operationally, maybe it's important to note that in a UCITS ETF, it is not possible to lose more than what you have invested, right? So leverage or no leverage, there is no extra risk if you want. And in fact, if you look at the efficient core ETFs and you look at the volatility of those ETF and those strategies, you realize that in fact the volatility is similar or even slightly lower than that of a 100% equity portfolio, which again shows that leverage on its own doesn't mean more risk, it depends what you do with it. The last point, again, still operational, but very important, is that as part of the strategy, there is a control of the weights between equity and fixed income that is done on a regular basis, right? So the target, as Elvira was saying, is 90% in equity, 60% in bond future contract. Of course, that can move over time, right? And so on a quarterly basis, we do rebalance to the target weight, but also we monitor those weights on a daily basis to make sure that they don't deviate more than 5%. So for example, if you have a scenario where equity go down and the weight is not 90-60 anymore, but is 85-65, for example, we would sell some of those bond futures contract to bring back the target weights to 90-60. So that also controls the risk, and that's obviously an important part of a leverage portfolio, right?
So you've both touched on the idea of portfolio construction, and I suppose there are lots of ways in which these ETFs can be used in a portfolio. What are the different options that you would highlight?
So the first option, I think, lies in the fact that the Sharpe ratio of a leverage 90-60 has been demonstrated to be higher than that of an equity portfolio, for example, in the Cliff Asness paper that Elvira was mentioning earlier, which means that for the same level of risk as a 100% allocation to equity, you could achieve outperformance if that Sharpe ratio is in fact higher, right? And so if you end up with a portfolio that has outperformance versus equities, similar level of risk, and in fact lower drawdown, which is what we see historically as well, then you have a portfolio that can be a great replacement or a great complement to a core equity portfolio.
Both empirical research and theoretical foundations, and a series actually of portfolio insights that we published at WisdomTree imply that investors can improve their long-term returns by diversifying a mix of equities and bonds with other asset classes. But with so many alternative investments available for investors, the main question is how to make room for all those diversifiers without actually reducing much your equity allocation. And here, Efficient Core can be used as a capital efficiency tool. So essentially, by allocating 2/3 of your portfolio to Efficient Core, you are already creating 60-40 exposure to equities and bonds, and you're also freeing up 1/3 of your portfolio for allocation to other diversifiers.
It can also be a low-cost, one-stop solution for long-term investment for retirement, right? For example, because if you think about Efficient Core, right, it can be considered as having the same type of risk as a 100% equity portfolio, meaning that the long-term growth potential is similar, but you also have the diversification of the bond that is overlaid on top of the equity. And so you have both this diversification, and so the risk advantage of having the diversification, but also the long-term potential of a 100% equity portfolio. And in some way, that basically solve this portfolio paradox we were talking about for someone that wants to invest long-term.
Very interesting topic, explained very well. Pierre, Elvira, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mabin. It was a pleasure.